I own a restaurant that doesn't have a bin. The popular term for this is zero waste. For me, to be zero waste is to be natural. The current landscape of food in the world today is not so natural. It's industrial. This is why waste exists. A decade before this journey began, I was not doing very well in school. I hated school. Felt like a caged animal, suppressed and without a voice. Thankfully, they let me out of the cage and I found my way into a local kitchen. Kitchens can be pretty unruly places, full of anarchy and chaos. The life of a chef isn't too dissimilar to the life of a pirate. Whilst there are rules and discipline, there is a freedom to express yourself, to be yourself, to become an individual. I felt like I'd woken up. See, something in school gave me something of a failure complex, and I decided when I decided to be a chef, I had to work for the best restaurants. I wanted to work for the best restaurants in the world. The insecure chip on my shoulder demanded it. Whilst my agenda was questionable, something rather amazing happened. You see, I decided to not go to one restaurant. I decided to go to dozens of restaurants, all of which inspired me, all of which were very good, world class. I was catching glimpses of multiple complementary chefs that were thinking and doing things a particular way, which was, to me, was brilliant. I was soaking up so many different points of view. Now, perspective is a beautiful thing. I'm a big fan of perspective. I think it's highly underrated. Perspective is like a jigsaw puzzle. The more pieces through life that you can collect, the greater the image you can see. Now, when you can see the bigger picture, you can react accordingly. When I was on this gastronomic crusade, I found myself in Australia. I was particularly attracted to work at this particular restaurant, one of these world-class restaurants. And the food looked so natural, almost like it had fallen from a tree and onto the plate. Unfortunately, what I discovered with this restaurant is that it wasn't so natural. I was on the protein section. It was my duty to butcher pig's heads. Every day I would have to butcher over 110 pig's heads. I would have to cut the pig's face off of its skull. I would then take a blowtorch, singeing the hair from its face. The smell was intoxicating. Then, eventually, when I prepped them all, I would then sous vide the pig's heads, which is a name for a posh plastic bag. Then they would be steamed in the oven overnight, constant water flooding into these ovens and then escaping down the drain. The next morning, with help, I would take the pig's heads, purge them into these big baths of ice. Then tip the ice away as soon as the pig's heads were chilled, strip the bags away into the bin. Recycling wasn't a concept that we understood. Eventually then I'd have these gelatinous, flabby mountain of pig's heads that I would then trim down to a piece of meat the size of a golf ball. 80% or more of these pig's heads were cut away into the bin or the skip, condemned without a fair trial. Defiling hundreds upon hundreds of pig's heads for a few short, forgettable moments of gluttony is wrong. Sometimes this perspective that I champion isn't always so pretty. Sometimes parts of the puzzle are ugly. However, very important. As if by some force of cosmic serendipity, around that time in Australia, I met the zero waste messiah. From pig's heads to profit, by way of beautiful contrast. This chap's name was Joost Bakker. He was a huge Dutchman with blonde hair and piercing blue eyes, and he had this presence. You know, brilliant people have this remarkable presence. It was as if Joost was from the future, a future where everything made more sense, a future where they had all of the answers. Everything that Joost did, everything that he said, his actions, his ideas, were so simple, yet people couldn't quite catch on. They were so radical. It was Joost's premonition for a zero-waste restaurant. I happened to be there at that time and place and was lucky enough to be taken on board. Spent a few years in Australia with Joost, working in the genesis of this idea. Unfortunately, it was my home time. England was beckoning me back. I spent a lot of time considering what had happened in Australia, knowing that I'd caught a glimpse into the future, at least my future. I was on the right path. This sexy warehouse door is now the home of Silo. I happened upon this beautiful door wandering around the streets of Brighton. As soon as I looked at that door and through the window, I knew this was the right place. Now, I'd like to share a quote, and it's a quote which sums up how I see Silo, what it means to me at its core. And it's a quote from Desmond Tutu. And Desmond said, "There comes a point where you have to stop pulling people out of the river, only to go upstream to find out why they're jumping in." Silo doesn't tackle the problem. Silo is a means to prevent that problem forever existing. A systemic intervention, extracting the DNA of the problem. I'm going to stop philosophizing and start explaining how Silo works. So you have to, when you're trying to avoid having a bin, you have to reverse engineer the supply chain. You have to trade directly with everything that you need. And then everything comes in a vessel that can endlessly be reused. And if it can't endlessly be reused, it will be completely natural or biodegradable. So the next dilemma is whole foods. You see, whole foods is the way we accept ingredients, because whole foods don't come processed. As soon as processing exists, so does legislation and laws and confusion. We are sidestepping that confusion and deciding to take the whole foods upon ourselves. So we mill flour. We mill flour from whole wheat that comes straight from the farm to create bread. We churn butter. We roll oats. We ferment food. We turn milk into cheese and yogurt. Now, lastly, when all is said and done and we're eating this food, eventually there will be waste. But at Silo, all of that waste is organic. Now, the organic waste that we don't eat is eaten by Bertha. Bertha is our closed-loop organics compost machine. She's an aerobic digester that can turn up to 60 kilos of organic waste into compost in just one day. So, to simply conclude, everything that comes into Silo is package-free or natural, and then everything that doesn't go into our bellies goes into the belly of Bertha. Very simple. Now, before this story gets too fluffy, maybe romantic, I want to bring it back down to earth a little bit. There isn't a day at Silo where something doesn't go horribly wrong. There isn't a week where I don't find my head in my hands. A great man once said, when you open a business or a company that is innovative, it's like chewing on glass and staring into the abyss. If anything I say today inspires you, know this. Progress is messy. We humans have an irrational fear of the unknown. We're terrified of what we don't understand. As soon as you become different, you're a target. Do I sound extreme? I'm talking about a restaurant. Does this maybe sound extreme? Try putting everything that you believe in on a bullseye, only to see it get shot at again and again and again. So, to lighten the tone, when you are trading with this farmer and you're receiving his or her grain or milk, your relationship to food changes very quickly. It was insisting upon this model of having no bin where I realized something. We were outside of the industrial sphere. Now, when you're on the outside of something for so long, you can see that thing for what it really is. You can see it for its flaws. Now, there's a name for people that oppose industrial progress: a Luddite. I don't consider myself a Luddite, though I do think it's very, very important to highlight that processed industrial food is not alive. We, however, are alive. We're on a planet which is alive. It doesn't make sense to eat food which is dead. Now, industrialism is a brilliant idea. So is capitalism. The problem with both of these things, peas in a pod, is greed. When greed enters the equation, the system fails. Now, there's an expression, you can't see the wood for the trees. I feel like we were in the wood, and then by default, by having this limitation, we left the wood, only to turn around and see the wood was on fire. Now, why am I telling you all of this? I'm telling you this because this is the bigger picture. This is the wood ablaze. It's the industrialism of food that is making us ill. Furthermore, it's making the planet ill. It's this detachment from people to nature that creates apathy. Now, when your back is turned on nature, your value of food, of nature, changes. Food becomes expendable. It's a commodity. Like I said before, this is why waste exists. I have a theory of hacking perspective. And it's simple. It's insisting that your mind sees things differently. I call this idea careful chaos. By not having a bin is forcing ourselves to see things differently. Limitation is a beautiful thing. It's the limitation that we create for ourselves. So not having a bin is like going through one door, but when you go through that door, there's 10 more doors. And this limitation should be embraced. We certainly do. Silo has become a creative powerhouse through this limitation. This plate is made out of waste plastic bags. Now, if you look at waste plastic bags as waste, then that's what it will always be. But if you find those very small, be it, jewels of potential, you may see something different. You may see a form. You may even see beauty. I like to think of this plate as a symbol. Symbol is a strong word, but I really do. For something which really represents this ideology. Waste is a failure of the imagination. This is my favorite villain. I'm not talking about the forager, but what he's holding. This is Japanese knotweed. According to the internet, Japanese knotweed is the world's most invasive plant. If you look at this terrorist, you'll only see a problem. But when you shift your perspective, you will see this plant is delicious. In the spring, it's tender, it's bright and acidic. It's multifunctional. You can eat it raw, you can cook it, you can pickle it, you can brine it, do whatever you want with it. We turned them into canapes. This was in spring, and we cut the young tender shoots, which are hollow inside like bamboo. And we stuffed it with a raw sheep's cheese mousse with some wild garlic. And you ate them, and it was all raw, and it was completely divine. And then, with the shorter, thinner stems, we made straws. And then, through this process, there was a lot of waste, bearing in mind that this plant itself was not only waste, but an invader, a problem. So we were eating the problem. And through these preparations I've highlighted, there was a lot of waste, lots of bits and bobs. And in true silo fashion, we looked at it and said, we could do this. So we pickle-brined all of the trim, cut them into small little chunks, and then we had it. We had these little chunks of pickle, brine, Japanese knotweed, and they were salty and sweet and delicious and sour. Kind of like some olives that, olives were what sprang to mind when we tasted this product. And we started thinking, okay, well, what could we use this for? What would we use an olive for? And then we thought about, what about a martini? Yeah, instead of an olive, we can put pickled Japanese knotweed. So yeah, introducing the world's most invasive martini. Yeah, this is all year round. It's a nice aperitif to start the meal, using that beautiful invader. Now, one day, this is one of my more abstract ideas. One day I was sleep-deprived, delirious, staring into this compost, wondering how it could smell so citrusy. When I discovered that the brewers, we have a brewery, a brilliant gallant bunch of lads that make all of our drinks and bring them in reusable kegs. And they had deposited 60 kilos of organic lemon waste into Bertha. It looks to me like compost, but it smells like lemon. And interestingly to note, this lemon was like the third layer of waste. They had intercepted, which means the lemons were rejected from the supermarket for superficial reasons. So they had stopped it from going to landfill, to waste. They then made a phenomenal batch of lemonade or whatever it was they were making, and then scattered it all. So we were receiving third layer of waste of lemons and then putting it into Bertha. And maybe it's because of the sleep deprivation. Maybe I'm just, I was just thinking outside the box that day. But it made sense to cook these carrots that I had that day in the compost, which which sounds crazy. So this was the 60 kilos of organic lemon waste going into Bertha. And then just 24 hours later, when that lemon waste had broke down into her compost, we had lemony compost, which then we baked these carrots in. Now, as obscure as this is, these carrots tasted of lemon. It was the best kind of lemon. It was beautiful and elegant and fragrant and bright, but not too acidic. You had this natural sweetness from this carrot. This actually turned into a dish. And this dish I served at an event which, without any question, was the most important event of my life. I was cooking this dish for my hero. So, I'm not saying that cooking carrots in compost is the answer to life's problems. However, maybe a shift in perspective might reveal some of those answers. With a problem like waste, you can look too closely at it. What I'm suggesting is to take a step back and to see the bigger picture. We've designed waste into this world. And I believe, in fact, I'm certain we can design waste out again. Thank you.